So good afternoon. My name is Brittany Hernan, and I'm the Early Detection Project Manager with Western New York PRISM. And so I work with invasive species that are not yet common or widespread in our region with the goal of eradication. And slender false brome is one of these early detection invasive species that I will talk about today. So Western New York PRISM is a partnership for regional invasive species management. New York State is split up into 8 PRISM regions as shown on the map. And then Western New York region encompasses the 8 westernmost counties of the state. And so I included our entire mission on the slide, but in general, we proactively identify, evaluate, and address invasive species priorities using a coordinated partnership to protect local aquatic and terrestrial resources. And so a key factor of this work is the partnership aspect. We have a program where partners can request assistance with invasive species. We are not contracted out. They do not pay money for our assistance. Instead, they focus on this partnership aspect. So maybe they provide volunteers that might help with manual removal, or they cut down woody species before our team applies herbicide. They might make social media posts or other things to help other people learn about our work. And then they implement some type of long-term management plan so they can eventually take over the work when the species are at a more manageable level. And as I mentioned before, I focus on the early detection aspect of our organization, and I have spent a great deal of time over the past 3 years working with slender false brome. So this species was first reported in North America in 1939 in Oregon, where it quickly spread out to form dense monocultures and negatively impacted rare ecosystems. And then once people knew of the species and started looking for it, slender false brome was found in California, Washington State, and British Columbia in the Pacific Northwest. And then much later, it popped up on the other side of North America in our region. So in the Great Lakes Basin, it has been reported in New York, Michigan, and in Ontario, in Gray County at the Norden Nature Reserve. And it was first reported in 2009 in 2 separate locations in New York. And then as multiple new occurrences started to show up, professionals across the state realized that the species was more widespread than they initially thought, and that it would have harmful impacts if it was left untreated. And this is a map that our GIS technician created to show the distribution of slender false brome in North America, just to give a better visual of where slender false brome has been reported. And so Western New York PRISM took the lead and acquired funding from the Environmental Protection Agency through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to form the Great Lakes Slender False Brome Working Group. After, as I mentioned, people recognized the risk that slender false brome posed not only to New York State, but the region. And so this working group is a collaborative focused on education and outreach and improving management methods for the species. I have the core functions listed on the slide, and the group meets to determine the best ways to focus on these functions. And so I just have a couple of pictures of the group. There's one of a bunch of people outside learning about the species. This is actually a really nice, a fun workshop, a survey workshop, where it got professionals out into the field to really see slender false brome, be able to ID the grass, right in person, and then practice using some of the tools we use to collect data. And so we really strive to teach people how to identify and manage this invasive grass so new populations can be reported and treated in the region so we can move towards the goal of eradication. So why are we putting all of this effort into slender false brome? Slender false brome, or Brachypodium sylvaticum, is a species of grass native to Eurasia and North Africa and is highly invasive in the region. The species forms dense clumps, and each clump produces hundreds of seeds, and this leads to the formation of monocultures and the exclusion of native biodiversity in the area. And so in the picture, you can see those individual clumps in the photo, and also notice that no other species are present in the understory. And then the seeds have these long awns on them, so they easily catch onto people and animals and spread to new locations. And the species grows well in many habitat types: disturbed, pristine, wet to dry soils, full sun, full shade, forests, open grasslands, the list goes on, unfortunately. And wildlife and livestock do not eat the species, so when seeds are transported to a new place, they have a high likelihood of growing, of establishing, and then there's very few factors that would keep that population in check. And so before I dive into the working group efforts, I just wanted to share a bit of slender false brome identification information for those who have not seen the plant before. And we do have a more detailed identification sheet that I can share as well. It's on our website. And the ID sheet compares Slender Falls brome to lookalike grasses as well to help with identification in the field. But this grass has flat, bright green leaves that arch out from the center of the plant to form a clump. The bright green color can actually be seen late into the season, so it's easy to ID in the fall when some other plants start to die back. The leaves, the nodes, and the stems have tiny white hairs on them. They're pretty distinct, as you can see in the one photo. The nodes really have a lot of the white hairs. They're on the sides of the leaves, so that's a good identifying factor. And the flowers are also drooping, so they arch out again from the center of the plant and kind of just add into that clump. And then, as I mentioned, the seeds have those long awns that catch onto people and animals and transport to new locations. And so, as I mentioned, if you're interested in more on this species, you can check out our website or message me for the link to the ID fact sheet. So one core function of the working group is partner network coordination and communication. We held quarterly working group meetings for the first 2 years and now have moved to meeting twice a year. We met both in person and remotely and hope to be able to have an in-person meeting soon enough again. So the group brings people together to talk about their research. You know, the more we know about the plant, the more we can tailor our management treatments. So we have some people looking at soil composition in Slender Falls brome infestations and non-infested areas, also looking into Slender Falls brome interactions with native species. Some members have suggested new survey locations for us to go to, which is really helpful to get input from people that live in an area and frequent the trails. We also have members from 22 organizations that participate in these meetings. And while a lot of participants are from New York State, because that's where the group started, it's not just a New York State group, it's a Great Lakes Basin-wide collaborative. So we do have attendees from Michigan, Ontario, and MIT as well. And we just want to focus on putting everyone's research together and making information available across the Great Lakes Basin. And so the working group also focuses on spread prevention and education and outreach. We have installed some boot brush stations near Slender Falls brome infestations. These have signs that describe efforts you can take to clean off your equipment, your clothing, so you don't spread seeds to new areas and accidentally move invasive species around. They have descriptions of invasive species on them, and then they have a nice little boot at the bottom that you can clean dirt off of your shoes and hopefully clean out any seeds that might be trapped in your tread of your footwear. We also held workshops that had a classroom portion to learn about the species and then an interactive outdoor portion to see all of our work in the field. And we did a few conference presentations, smaller presentations, and reached over 260 people through those efforts. I wrote an article for a town newsletter, and we mailed out letters, and people actually responded and gave us permission to come onto their private property to survey the area, and then we provided them with management guidance. And so moving forward, we really just want to, with COVID-19, continue to hold trainings virtually and just figure out the best way to make those interactive as well so people can still learn about this species. And so a large part of this project is surveying trails, parks, forested edges to determine the presence and distribution of Slender Falls brome, because you really can't carry out effective management until you know how widespread a species is. And so our basic survey protocol is we go to parks, natural areas, and walk along all trails, roads, the parking lot, the forested edge, maybe the picnic areas to look for the target species. And then when it's found, we collect data and then continue to survey off trail into the forest to map out the infestations. And so our initial survey protocol was a little more in depth. We collected information on overstory cover, pH, things like that. And we just really wanted to learn more about Slender Falls brome. And now that we've seen that it can really grow in any type of cover and it grows in a pretty neutral pH, so we kind of shifted the protocols a bit to drive management efforts and really focus on rapid response. So right now we look at percent cover and plant distribution. This helps us determine the best management practices. So, you know, are we sending a couple of people out with shovels for part of a day to dig up plants, or are we getting the whole crew out there for a week to apply herbicide? We also collect data on plant phenology, since species don't always follow their descriptions in field guides. I know Slender Falls brome is listed as producing flowers in July, but we've seen many sites where the flowers are present at the end of June and seed is actually already there by the first week of July. And so this is really important so you can tailor your treatment before seeds are produced so it's effective and so you don't spread the seed around. And then we have technicians take photos, so we have that documentation, and all of that information is collected for all of the populations, and then a site-wide early detection assessment form is completed as well, with more information just about property owners, how to find the infestations, where to park, where the source population is, things like that. And then we sit down and we review all of this data and then determine our best management strategy so we can begin the process of planning, gaining permission, filling out any permits, things like that. And this year we actually only found one new Slender Falls Brome population, and we're able to work closely with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to get that treated this season. And then starting in 2018, we conducted research to determine the best management practices for this species. So New York has different environmental climate variables, things like that, different pesticide laws compared to the Pacific Northwest. So we didn't want to assume everything that worked there would work here. So we took large Slender Falls Brome infestations at 2 different parks, split them up into 4 different management units, and left a small untreated control. So we tested manual removal, where we dug up all of the plants in an area and contained them into landfill-bound trash bags. Mechanical removal, where our very helpful partners at the sites went out and cut the plants as low to the ground as possible with a weed whacker or a string trimmer, and that was done twice in a season to prevent seed formation. We tested herbicide treatment with Accord XRT2, which is glyphosate, and that was also done before seed production using backpack sprayers and foliar application techniques. And then the fourth method was a combination of mechanical control and herbicide application. And then we collected pre and post treatment data in the plots. So we looked at percent cover and density of Slender Falls Brome, and then we listed all other species in the plot and looked at native and non-native percent cover. And so after 2 seasons of treatment, we saw that manual, herbicide only, and mechanical herbicide treatment were all statistically significant. And so when we looked at all of our data, for most large infestations, we now choose herbicide only. It doesn't seem like the cutting added anything to the treatment, any sort of benefit, and it just takes extra time. And then manual removal is very time consuming and detrimental to soil. So it's a good option for small populations or an area where herbicide cannot be used. And then the picture that I have on the screen shows one side of the trail that was mowed for 2 years and the other side treated with herbicide. And so on the mowed side, you can see all of that green. That's all of the Slender Falls Brome coming back in. And so this does stop seed production, but it doesn't really affect percent cover from year to year. The plants still come back strong, and those plots were no different from the untreated control. So mechanical treatment is good for an area while you're planning additional management efforts, but alone, it doesn't seem like it would lead to eradication. And we did summarize all of our efforts into a strategic plan for management. And so if you were interested in trying a different treatment method, a different herbicide, something like that, all of our methods are listed there. And it's really just a summary of the different things that we tried, different fact sheets, outreach materials that could be adjusted and tailored to your needs. So we have that. We wanted to do the work and then share our work with others so they didn't have to create some of these different resources as well. And so with that, I just wanted to talk about a couple of lessons learned. So obviously the big thing from this research was that we developed the best management practices guide that we can help partners with to assist with management decisions. And I really was just very excited and surprised about all of the support we received throughout the project. We had a removal day in one town where we had to get permission from the town board, and then we went out and dug up the plants, and the town supervisor actually showed up and he brought us cookies and water, and then the same town helped construct boot brush stations and provided cement and larger screws when we needed them. And we worked in the adjacent town as well, and for that we had a board member that had to come out and meet us just to unlock a gate so we could get to the spot we wanted to put the boot brush station. And he ended up bringing a post hole digger and a pickaxe and just joined in with us the whole day and helped construct these boot brush stations, which was not expected. We thought he was just, unlocking the gate and locking it back up at the end of the day. We did work with some middle school and high school students at an environmental camp, and they all, it was very well received. They seemed like they had a good time just collecting data, learning how to use a field guide to identify Slender Falls Brome. We held a working group meeting at the Nature Center for one of those parks that we carried out the management research. And the people there were just great to work with. They didn't make us pay the fee. And then they also printed out the agenda and the slides for us, which was unexpected. When we got there for the meeting, all of that was printed out and ready to go. They ran a phone line through the ceiling for us to use. So I just feel like, in general, reach out to a lot of different people, different audiences, because you really don't know who will be interested and step up So I think it's just important not to rule out any groups and just think, oh, they wouldn't be interested in invasive species, so we won't take the time to educate them. And then also just that our second year of management took almost double the amount of time as the first year, because in the first year we were looking at these really big clumps, and then the second year we were kind of combing through the landscape to find seedlings. And so just something to unfortunately be ready to potentially commit a greater amount of time, you know, in your second or third year of management, but it will pay off overall. And so with that, I can hopefully stop sharing my screen to see the chat and then take any questions. All right. So the only herbicide that we tried was glyphosate. We just wanted something that was readily available that we could use. And when we looked at some of the research in the Pacific Northwest, they seem to have the best results with glyphosate, but they did use some other grass-specific herbicides as well. And so I would say if people were not interested in using glyphosate, we do have that strategic plan that people could use. And if you wanted to test out some different treatment options as well, you could follow sort of the same research methods that we did. And then as far as I know, it's just that one site in Ontario in Grey County at that Norden Nature Reserve. There was a paper written about that, but I'm going to assume if people aren't really looking for it or managing the area, it's very possible that it's in other sites as well, because it does spread pretty easily. And so if you were interested in more information on ID, I can send that along if people want to reach out to me about that, because I think it might be, especially if you work in the area, it might be important to put this on a list and maybe train some people or be more aware of it. Yeah, I actually have all of those resources that I had in there. I can put those into the chat after this. So the deer don't actually browse the slender false brome. They actually, I think they did some experiments with sheep, and they really had to force them, like they had to feed them with bottles from when they were little with like slender false brome infused milk to get them to do it. But then I think they later realized there might be some sort of toxin, and so they stopped all of that. So it doesn't seem like they browse on it, but there are many deer trails where the species is found. So I think that deer definitely move the seed around for sure and facilitate the movement to new areas.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your great work, Brittany. Another great example of many hands and a lot of collaboration and cooperation. So thank you.